Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here, and welcome to an in-depth kind of critical analysis, review, question and answer video on Sleeping Gods. I finished up the first of part, or the first run through of a campaign, and so I'm here to talk in more detail. This video is going to be a long one, and it's going to be broken into 3 different parts. We're going to do a question and answer time, and then a look at some reading list, and then we're going to go down to the table and take a look at the game with no regards whatsoever for spoilers. So the first 2 parts of the video won't have any spoilers, and I will announce when the spoilers will start. So first of all, I got some questions from the Dungeon Dive patrons, and I wanted to say thank you to all of you who are supporting the Dungeon Dive, helping keep the channel completely 100% independent without having to have advertisements and do like paid Kickstarter previews. I super appreciate it. It's been going very well, and I thank you all. For those of you who can support me, there's a link down below, and if you can't, don't feel any obligation to. A view, a thumbs up, and a share is also a great support. So thank you to everybody who supports the Dungeon Dive. So one of the questions that I was asked recently was, is this my first Red Raven game? And that would be no. And that is kind of an important question because my journey with Red Raven has been kind of an uphill battle. So the games that I've played from Ryan Laukat and Red Raven Games are City of Iron, Empires of the Void 2, Architects Inc., Above and Below, and Near and Far. Sleeping Gods is the first one of his games that I have loved. I've always loved Ryan Laukat's art. I have been deeply in love with the worlds that his games inhabit. I mean, he writes great background world building and lore, and even his like non-story games have interesting backgrounds. I just never have really gotten along with the core gameplay. The closest I've gotten to loving another one of his games in terms of gameplay was Empires of the Void 2, which is a fantastic game, but I just never really play competitive games anymore. It's not something I am drawn to, so I'm not going to play that game, and I did end up selling that. I also liked Architects Inc. It's a decent little kind of worker placement, engine building, action selection type game, and pretty good. City of Iron I felt was too complex for what it was, even though I really liked the world again. Above and Below, I found the gameplay to be really dull, and the storytelling was like so separate from the game that it just felt really tacked on, and so I didn't really get along with that game. Near and Far got a little close, but again, I felt like the Euro trappings of the gameplay were it was completely disconnected from the storytelling. So if you were playing to win, you were actually like better off ignoring the interesting parts of the story and focusing on the Euro mechanisms of the gameplay. While Near and Far got better about the storytelling than Above and Below, there are some really interesting story things in Near and Far, and now you can play it solo with the expansion. It still didn't feel like the 2 elements were gelled together as a cohesive whole. Sleeping Gods is what I believe to be the first game from Ryan Laukat that really melds those 2 elements together in a cohesive, interesting manner where you don't want to avoid or ignore the gameplay or the story. They both work in tandem. Another question is, what other games would you compare it to? I see it has a storybook, so would it be similar to Forgotten Waters or Stuffed Fables, the Jerry Hawthorne games? So I have not played Forgotten Waters. I've heard that game works better as a group game and not so much as a solo game, so I haven't played that. But I have played Stuffed Fables and, of course, Aftermath, and then the precursors, Mice and Mystics. Let's back up a little bit. The games that this reminds me most of is if you were to take all of the good elements of a game like Tales of the Arabian Nights, Fabled Lands game book series, and the Inkle iOS game 80 Days. If you were to take all of the good elements of those games and combine them together, you would get something like Sleeping Gods. As a matter of fact, while I was playing, part of me was asking, like, why isn't this just a iOS game? Because like 80 Days, you are managing resources, you are having narrative adventures, you are trying to survive on this grand epic adventure of discovery. It's a lot like 80 Days. And so I was wondering, well, why isn't this just an iOS game? And I started thinking about the theme of sailing, of boating. And I am by no means a seasoned sailor. I'm not even an amateur. I wouldn't even call myself an amateur. I've been sailing like a handful of times. But during those times, what struck me the most about the act of sailing is it is hard work. You are constantly moving things around. You're manipulating rigging and tying and untying knots, and it's not a relaxing boat trip. It's work. And so for me, that theme kind of translates pretty well to this board game of working to manipulate pieces, pushing them around, physically doing things on the table does connect me more to the theme of being on a seafaring vessel more than just pushing a button on a screen would. And so I think it was a wise decision to keep this as a board game. As far as like, is it like Stuffed Fables or any of Jerry Hawthorne's other games? I don't think it is. While the two share similar aspects and they both have spiral-bound books that you are working through, in Jerry Hawthorne's adventure book games, each page is like a self-contained little game. It's a self-contained board with the story on that page that you are working through. The books in Sleeping Gods are more open-ended. The map book is an open world atlas that you can go anywhere in. You're not contained within one page. It's more about a sense of discovery, whereas Stuffed Fables is more about, or Sleeping Gods is more of like a grand sense of adventure and discovery, whereas I think Jerry Hawthorne's games are more kind of narrowly focused on working through this one specific part of a journey. And so very different feels. I also don't really feel like this is anything like Seventh Continent, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. What is your absolute favorite thing about Sleeping Gods? And that really is that sense of discovery, of not knowing what's around the bend. Now, there is an issue with that being my favorite thing, because eventually that sense of discovery will not be there. I will have discovered it all. Now, granted, it's going to take a long time, and we'll talk about that when we look at all the components and everything. There will come a time where I have read, most of what needs to be read in the book. I will have discovered most of the quests or most of the items. That sense of discovery is going to dissipate with every playthrough. So the long term of this being like way high on my top 10 if it gets there, that might have to be something that I consider as time goes on. Since there isn't a large component of randomness to this game. It's not something like Secrets of the Lost Tomb where you have 4 or 5 different kinds of decks that you can shuffle to never know what's going to come up, or something like Talisman. It's not a game. It's not an adventure game in this sense, or Arkham Horror, or A Touch of Evil, or Fortune and Glory, where you're always kind of playing the same game, but you never know what you're going to get. In this game, you never know what you're going to get, but as you play it more and more, that is going to shrink. So that is something to keep in mind. How is this different from being just a less punishing Seventh Continent. So I really don't see much comparison between this game and Seventh Continent, except for the fact that they are both adventure games where you are exploring. In Seventh Continent, I felt very disconnected from the characters and from the adventure. To me, Seventh Continent felt more like a puzzle game. Even though Sleeping Gods has puzzle-like elements, I felt more connected to the narrative on an emotional level, and I especially felt more connected to the characters and their well-being. One of my characters in this game like straight up died at the end, and I was like, no. I mean, I was kind of upset, and I really cared about the crew of the Manticore in this game, far more than I ever cared about any of the characters in Seventh Continent. There is, for me, a emotional connection to this game that just works on a deeper level than I ever felt from Seventh Continent. Seventh Continent, to me, feels more like a survival game where you really are working with the efficiency of keeping your characters alive, of hunting, of gathering, of inching forward down a path. And if you veer off that path, you're going to have a bad time. This game, Sleeping Gods, is all about just branching off from the path and seeing what happens. So it is a very different kind of game. Somebody was interested in the future of this game. Now, is it going to be available at retail? And we have confirmed. I got a notice from somebody on Facebook who talked to Red Raven Games. You know, the core game will be hitting retail soon, March, beginning of April, along with either with or shortly after the Tides of Ruin expansion will be hitting retail and the Dungeons expansion. So everything you need to have the core game experience will be available at retail. So just don't pay crazy eBay prices now. It's not worth it. Just wait. The only things that really won't be available at retail are some of the upgraded fancy components, maybe like the metal money. And that's the only thing I have. I don't have the sculpted materials or items. I actually like the way the tokens look better. And there's also one other element called Mac's Journal, which is kind of like an illustrated story lore guide that I don't have. And I don't think that will be available at retail either. How do you think this game would fare at different player counts? And do you think it works best as a solo experience? Absolutely, this is a solo game. I cannot imagine playing this game with a group. It is a solo game through and through for me, just like Seventh Continent is, just like Hexplorit is. Playing this game in a group, to me, would be just like if you were to play a game like Skyrim, and you were to just pass the controller around every 10 minutes. That can be fun, but it's not a multiplayer experience. You are one ship in this game working towards a single goal. You, as the other players, if you're not the first player, all you're really doing is continuing along the trajectory that the first player, or probably the owner of the game, would set. There is no way around the alpha player in this game unless you just want to make sure that nobody has a good time by going against that. Sure, you could discuss things about different choices, but at the end of the day, one person is going to be making those choices for the group. So I really wish that there still seems to be a stigma around solo board gaming. Although it is shrinking, it is still there. And I wish designers who made games like Sleeping Gods, like Seventh Continent, like Hexplorit, would really just embrace the idea that, hey, these are solo games. Yes, you can share that solo experience with other people, but at the end of the day, this is a one player making all the choices, going through the adventure. I could see it working well with like a husband and wife, or boyfriend and girlfriend, or boyfriend and boyfriend, significant other type game. It's just a two-player. We're both experiencing the game, but in a group, I think it would be super boring to play. Same as like Aetherfields. You know, these are at their core solo games where you are experiencing a story. So for me, Sleeping Gods is 100% solo game. And then somebody said that he originally backed it on Kickstarter, but backed out because he wasn't fully convinced. I get that. I was not fully convinced either. I have not loved a Ryan Lochte Red Raven game. It's taken me a long time. I had hopes, not even faith. I had hopes that this would be the game that delivered upon that promise of melding cool core game mechanics with exploring a world. And he did. So if you are on the fence, hopefully what the videos that I've been making for this game will convince you. All right, so now we're going to talk about a little bit about a reading list, and maybe a little bit of a watching list, kind of. Well, not really, but so nautical themed fantasy is a pretty big subgenre of fantasy, and it is one that I like. It's one that I've read a little bit in. I am not an expert in that kind of subgenre. I did today, and I posted a link for it on the Dungeon Dive Patreon, but I just today discovered a newer collection of short stories called Sails and Sorcery. Really looking forward to reading that. All sword and sorcery stories set at sea. Super, that sounds really cool. But there are a large number of fantasy stories set at sea, set around the sea. Things that I have not read. Robin Hobb's Live Ship Traders trilogy sounds pretty interesting. Of course, there is China Miéville's Scar, which I have on my shelf and have not read. There is Scott Lynch's Gentleman Bastard series. I've only read the first one, The Lies of Locke Lamora. It was okay. It's kind of like that new kind of like modern fantasy style that I'm not super into, but I know people really like that a lot. And then, of course, there is C.S. Lewis's The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. That was always my favorite of the Narnia books. Tim Power's book on Stranger Tides is pretty fantastic. And that was actually a big inspiration for Monkey Island and the fourth Pirates of the Caribbean movies. Now, I don't like that fourth Pirates movie at all, but I really like the first three Pirates of the Caribbean movies, especially the third one, At World's End. At World's End is a fantastic piece of weird fiction in film. A tremendous, phenomenal movie. I absolutely love that movie. It is one of the most relentlessly weird Hollywood productions that I have ever seen. But there's something really romantic about a port town. You know, you have like Waterdeep or Lankmar. The Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stories often are set around a port town. And ports and harbors, they're always important to fantasy stories because they represent the hustle and bustle. They represent the coming and going and the potential for adventure. So some of the like seafaring fantasy, nautical fantasy that I like, and the series that this reminded me most of, even though, you know, time-wise it's set like in it's a different like period of time and setting, but that is Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea series. The first three, those are the only ones I've read, and they are absolutely fantastic. I'm sure everybody's read these, but even if you look at the map of Earthsea, it looks like the map of the Wandering Sea, the archipelago there. And I kept thinking of especially the tombs of Atuan and the Farthest Shore while I was playing this game. And I've been really wanting to reread these three books because they are so fantastic. So I'm going to do that soon. Highly recommended if you haven't read those yet. As far as epic fantasy goes, a genre I don't read a lot of, but one of my favorites is by Hugh Cook. and that is the Chronicles of an Age of Darkness, Volume 4. I believe there are 12 volumes that he finished. He had planned it to be like 20-volume stories. Just he had this like mass. He ended up dying, I think, of cancer. But this book, Volume 4, The Walrus and the Werewolf, is amazing. It is this absolutely fantastical, crazy, adventurous pirate story with all kinds of crazy characters and just a real great sense of adventure. Highly recommend The Walrus and the Werewolf. It is a little hard to find, but it is worth it. Okay, and then next up, of course, we have Michael Moorcock's Elric series, and the second book, the second collection of stories into a novel, is The Sailor on the Seas of Fate. But even the first story has a lot of sailing. There is a lot of sailing and a lot of sea adventures in the Elric saga, and so those are always fun to experience. And then it wouldn't be a Dungeon Dive video on books without a mention of who is quickly becoming my favorite, A. Merritt, and A Ship of Ishtar, an absolute classic of seafaring fantasy, of nautical fantasy. This is a really beautiful edition here that has drawings by Virgil Finlay. This is the, what was it called? The Memorial Edition. Just an absolutely gorgeous book, but The Ship of Ishtar, highly recommended. And then he died, and then an author named Hans Bach completed the Black Wheel, which is kind of a pirate-themed pulp adventure story. And then Hannes Bach also wrote The Sorcerer's Ship, which was kind of his take on the Ship of Ishtar. I have not read this yet. I recently got it. It is part of the Ballantine Books adult fantasy series edited by Lynn Carter. One author I have mentioned on the Dungeon Dive before in the Weird Western series, and that was R.S. Belcher. And this book I have not read yet, so I can't really vouch for its quality, but I can vouch for R.S. Belcher as an author. I think he's fantastic. But The Queen of Swords is a great pirate-themed book that I am really looking forward to reading. I'm especially interested in this theme now. All-time, like, great just adventure book from Walter Moores is The 13 and a Half Lives of Captain Blue Bear. Exquisitely illustrated fantasy book that is probably kind of more for kids, but this book is amazing. It's just this high-flying, seafaring adventure, all kinds of little these characters just are constantly getting involved in wacky, wild adventures. Very lighthearted, very whimsical, well written, and like I said, just wonderfully illustrated. And I cannot recommend this book enough. And from what I've heard, his other books are good as well, but I have not read them. I did just order one more today, so I am looking forward to getting that. But yeah, this is highly recommend this book there. And then finally, I have this book here called Sea Cursed, which is 30 Terrifying Tales of the Deep, edited by Liam McDonald, Stefan Diamonakowitz, and Martin Greenberg. This is, oh, wow. I found some talisman characters in here. I don't know why those were in there, but I'll have to check my talisman box to see if those were missing. Interesting. Weird fiction has a long history of being interested in the sea. You know, you have Lovecraft's and all of the deep ones and Dagon. And that's a long tradition. You know, of course, you have authors like William Hope Hodgson with his Pirates of the Glencarrig Ghosts of the, he has two kind of seafaring series of stories that he writes in, and my mind is kind of completely blank. But this has all kinds of great stuff in it. This was put together by, I believe, by Barnes and Noble, so you can probably pick this up for not much money. This has stories from Edgar Allan Poe, Arthur Conan Doyle, Joseph Conrad, William Hope Hodgson, The Boats of the Glencarrig, H.P. Lovecraft, Frank Belknap Long, Robert Bloch, Harry Kuttner, A.E. Van Vogt, Robert E. Howard, Clark Ashton Smith, Ray Bradbury, Roger Zelazny, Robert Aikman, Ramsey Campbell, Joe R. Lansdale, Brian Lumley, Clive Barker, Roald Dahl, Donald Von Dry. Yeah. If you're looking for some good sea-based weird fiction, this is a great collection. Just kind of a who's who of weird fiction authors. So yeah, that was the reading. Now we're going to go down into spoilers. I think I'm actually going to do this as two separate videos rather than editing them together because it's already 30 minutes long. Sorry guys, this is going to be a long one. So this will be kind of a part 2 of my look at Sleeping Gods, and we'll put this all together in a playlist for you guys to enjoy. So well, I hope you enjoyed this more of an overall discussion on Sleeping Gods, and answers and questions, and a reading list. Next up, we will do a in-depth look and kind of a spoiler discussion. So, all right, guys, take it easy. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.